Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Greenwood and Molnar show here on Newcastle Fans TV. The transfer window has started and everybody's freaking out. So we thought, well, Sam thought, because Sam has had the pleasure of speaking to this gentleman, Mark Wyatt, who is the Southampton correspondent for Hampshire News, to tell us all in regards to transfers, in particular for Southampton, because at Hampshire Live, it must be so busy, Mark, with everything going on, because Southampton, unfortunately, have been relegated and Newcastle seem to be getting mentioned with every single player that Southampton are putting up for sale. So you're the man to tell us everything about what's going on with Southampton and Newcastle United potentially doing any deals whatsoever. First things first, have you had a good summer break before all this madness begins properly?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, John. I really appreciate it. In terms of a break, I had 2 weeks, and in that time, Southampton announced a new manager. So yeah, that was quite a fun little 2 weeks I had off, where so much was happening. But yeah, you're right. There is so much going on at Southampton at the moment. It's not just the playing staff that are going to be changing, but obviously, like I said, there the manager, all the coaches, and right up to the director of football. It's been a complete change when the new club owners came in. It's a little bit chalk and cheese, to be honest, with Newcastle, because they changed owners around the same time, and Southampton's trajectory has gone one way, and Newcastle's, as you guys are very well aware, has gone the complete other. So yeah, very busy for me at the moment, and got a long way to go until September 1st, which is my favourite day of the year, when it all slams shut and I can be done with transfers for another little while longer.
I mean, when we first spoke, Mark, like we were on the Chronicles podcast and we were talking about the possible end of Ralph Hasenhüttl. A lot has happened since then.
Yeah.
It like you say about trajectories of different teams. We've had Carabao Cup semi-finals where you just gracefully dumped Manchester City out and made our Wembley weekend a reality. I imagine it's kind of reminiscent from the bad old days of when we had Mike Ashley and managers comings and goings, when we had all the madness going up in Newcastle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, fans of Southampton were really quick to point out how many similarities there were this season between this one and 2005, which is when Saints went down before from the Premier League. 3 managers in that year as well, and that kind of off the pitch turbulence. You guys have seen it. You guys have gone up and down yourselves in the Championship. It never really works, does it? And you pin your hopes on the next guy that comes through the door, and however affable they are. And we were lucky at Southampton that it might have turned a little bit toxic at times, but I think all 3 managers that were in charge of the club over the year did try their best. But some things just aren't meant to be, and I think this reset that Southampton are going to have, if they get this summer right, then they've got every chance of coming back up and it being a really positive thing. But obviously, in the immediate moment, it tastes a little bit bitter, doesn't it?
Sam and I have certainly been there when it comes to the Newcastle side of things, and I think we'd all agree that Southampton are a Premier League club and all, but name in terms of this next season coming, I should say. But of course, I think everybody will keep an eye to see how Southampton get along, especially with the former Newcastle United striker Adam Armstrong, because obviously he's a man that I think he didn't hide his emotions, did he, Sam, going into that Carabao Cup final, Carabao Cup semi-final in the first leg, where he gave it the good old celebration. Mark would have been there, of course, covering it. But Sam, I have to ask you, were you a bit unhappy to see that from a former Newcastle player? Before I get Mark's view on it.
Well, he handballed it, didn't he? So unlucky. So it is what it is, isn't it? He handballed it. He gave it the big one, and then he had egg on his face. But no, it doesn't bother me. Look at what Dan Burn against the other team that Mark covers, Brighton. Dan Burn didn't have to give it the big one when he scored that header in such a crucial game to seal our top 4 position. But no, it doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me when we're away. It bothers me when they come to St James's and do it.
I think with Adam Armstrong as well, he just doesn't score any goals. So I think when he starts, he's not looking at who he's just put the ball against. He's just happy to get one in the back of the net.
He probably will next season, to be fair.
Well, yeah, this is the hope for Southampton. I think he needs to as well. But I'm sure we'll go on to it. All the transfers that Southampton could do, and it's a knock-on effect for a lot of other players, seeing who sticks around and who doesn't. And Adam Armstrong's one of those that he could lead the line come August 4th against Sheffield Wednesday, or he could be on the bench again. So, we've got a long summer of waiting, I think.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of talent that could be heading out the door, which is obviously where our focus is now, because we've been linked with a few players already. I think the best place to start really is with Tino Livramento. I really like him. I think he's a cracking player, a player of real great potential. What can you tell us about him more in depth? And have you heard the rumblings around a potential bid from Newcastle?
Yeah, so I mean, first off, looking at the Newcastle approach, it's a lot of it I think comes from Dean Ashworth, doesn't it? And he really fancied him at Brighton, which I think some of that is where it comes from. I'm sure Newcastle have done their due diligence before Dean came into the club as well, and he's a player certainly that when he left Chelsea a few years ago, there were so many clubs that were looking at him, and he chose Southampton to be the one to further his development. I mean, the obvious thing with Tino is that horrible ACL injury that he went through and came back from, which is almost something that you can't really not mention at the moment when you talk about it. And it plays into so much. But, he's being linked with a lot of clubs and for good reason. And that is because he is really a special player. I mean, the very fact that when he first came in under Ralph, I forgot which game it was now. I think Man United was his second game and he was man of the match. But he came straight in and basically took Kyle Walker-Peters out of the team. He pushed Kyle Walker-Peters to the other side onto left back. And at 18, 19 years old, whatever he was, really nailed down that position. So I think anyone that does that in the Premier League, is going to kind of turn heads. And like I said, that ACL kind of stalled him a little bit. But what you see with him is a player who is, so confident and so brave in what you see in those young players. And, fingers crossed for him, he just gets the best out of it and gets to play as much as possible next season, wherever it is, whether it is in the Championship with Southampton or in the Premier League with Newcastle or anywhere else, because that's the one thing he needs more than anything right now is that kind of game time. Because, the ceiling is really high with him.
Of course, the potential's there with Livramento. I think you quite rightly mentioned the ACL injury with Livramento, and there's no doubt in the ability of the player. There's no doubt. You see, obviously, we've been fortunate to see Livramento in the Premier League for the last couple of years, and obviously we talked the injury. The injury is the injury. Do you think it's actually beneficial for him, though, personally? Let's take the Newcastle hat off, mate, for Sam and I for a second. For him to actually maybe play championship games just to build up his fitness. And maybe is this move a bit too early, but is it just one move that if you're Tino Livramento and his agent, a Champions League club, with huge aspirations, that you just can't turn it down? But it must be a really difficult conflict, like a dilemma, I suppose, for him.
Yeah, I think it is. I was talking to someone recently, and we kind of compared it to Ryan Sessegnon when he went from Fulham to Tottenham, and that was, he could have stayed and done another season in the Championship, I think it was, but he ended up going to Spurs and similar position and the England Youth International and stuff. So that's why it links. But he was one who kind of went and maybe there were players blocking his path. I know you guys obviously. Ashby Hammond is the one who you'd look at the moment in that Newcastle side and say, well, is he just ahead of Livramento if he did come in? Obviously, you got Trippier and the others in there as well. So, I personally think a year in the Championship, if it's a promotion season, that'd be fantastic. But I think if he stayed at Southampton, I think his development is probably best served there. He's an incredible physical player, so even though he's quite young, I don't know how much you would have seen of him, but he battles in every game. He's one that really goes for the fight. So. I think that would be probably quite exciting in the Championship for him to see that and hope he develops. And if he went to Newcastle, hypothetically, would he be straight into the team? Would he even be in the matchday squad? Would they consider loaning him back out anyway? So I don't know. There's a lot of questions to raise with it. But personally, and again, it's hard to take the Southampton hat off when you do this, but he'd be fantastic in the Championship and a brilliant asset to have. But I think him personally would develop really well there as well.
Yeah, I mean, putting my Newcastle hat firmly back on. Obviously, we've got quantity over quality in terms of strength and depth in the wing back positions. Trippier, obviously, team of the season, best right back in the Premier League. That's not me being biased. That was statistically true. He was in the team of the season. Dan Burn did a great job at left back, and then obviously, but behind them, it's the likes, as you said, Harrison Ashby, who's probably going to go out on loan. Manquillo is free to leave. Emil Kraft only signed a new deal last summer. Can Livramento, does he have the scope to play left back as well? And because obviously we've been linked with Kyle Walker-Peters as well as that. But do they have that kind of dual purpose role, the pair of them?
They do, but it's so much more evident with Kyle. And I'd say if you are comparing them based on that versatility, Kyle is probably the supreme player when it comes to being able to go on both sides. Not that Tino couldn't kind of develop that more, but he is so much more naturally gifted on that right side. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I haven't heard about any potential fee for Kyle Walker-Peters. I'm not sure exactly how much Southampton would look for him in this window. But I can't imagine, the prices that we've seen so far quoted for Tino. I'd probably say the fee for Carl wouldn't be too dissimilar. And although they're, the kind of profiles of the player and the ages are a little bit different, I think if you're looking at someone that has that versatility, I think Carl is the really obvious choice there. I get it. Tino is really exciting. And, that unknown about him, he could develop into an incredible England first teamer. But I don't know. For me, I always thought Carl would be the one who was the first one out the door, one of the early ones, because of that versatility he's got. And I think that's so rare in the Premier League as well. Sorry to cut you off, Johnny. That is so rare to find a player that is so comfortable on both sides and doesn't really shirk a challenge on either side too.
Yeah, it is. It is very, very rare. I just want to touch back on Livramento in terms of the actual fee, because there has been a few conflicting reports of actually what Newcastle have offered or potentially have offered and what Southampton actually want. Could you give us just a brief summary on that Livramento side of things in terms of what actually do Southampton want? Because for a player that's had an ACL injury, and I know they're in the Championship, and there's probably more players that maybe command a higher fee in terms of award prizes, which we'll mention later on. But what is actually the actual negotiations at this moment in time?
Well, a lot of it is kind of explained. There was actually a good piece in The Athletic that Jacob Tansworth did on this, actually. It's a lot of it is about the profit in that Southampton will want from him. And I don't know if you'll have seen this kind of sliding scale that you have of how much Southampton can profit. When you get to a certain amount, Chelsea will kind of kick in with their deal. So that is obviously at the forefront of negotiations. But I think at the moment, anyway, as far as I've been made aware, is that there is just kind of an impasse at the moment. Newcastle don't want to go over a certain price. Southampton don't want to go, they Southampton want to get up to a certain price. And I just don't think at the moment the deal is kind of, it could have advanced in the last 24, 48 hours. But I think we saw this morning from, it might have been the Telegraph. You'd have to double check if I'm wrong on there. The latest number it was at was about 21 million. And I don't think that's near enough for Southampton to want to get to in order for them to make that profit. So, if Newcastle walked away from it, it wouldn't massively surprise me. But considering it's not maybe a priority position, I know there's been talk about the budget at Newcastle and things like that. But I don't think Southampton are in a particularly worrying position in Tino's regard. He's got 3 years left on his contract at St Mary's, so that there isn't no really rush to sell him. And I know that a few people think that the player Tino himself wants to go there, and I can see why. It's a very attractive proposition for a young player. But until money talks, doesn't it? At the end of the day, and I don't think Southampton will be. And this isn't just a Newcastle bias as well. I don't think it's because they know that the money is there. I think Southampton will be fairly stubborn with a lot of their players this summer, because they know the position they're in. James Ward-Prowse, again, Kyle Walker-Peters, they don't need to leave if Southampton don't find a valuation that matches them. So I think that's probably the sticking point right at this moment between the two clubs.
That's interesting, because from a personal point of view, Livramento would be ideal. And Kyle Walker-Peters just does absolutely nothing for me. But then you, who watch them every week, say Walker-Peters is the clear option for versatility, which is probably what we're after.
Right now, yeah, I think that's right now as well. I mean, if Tino hadn't have had that ACL and he'd have had the year, he could be on the verge of the England squad for all we know. But if I was looking at it right now, I think I would go with Kyle.
Yeah, it's interesting because he just does nothing for me whatsoever. But then again,
yeah,
it's interesting though. So, what is the exact situation? Is it? Does the fee have to get to a certain point before Chelsea get a percentage for Livramento in a sell-on, or is it just a straight sell-on percentage that they have?
I think it's the latter. You'll have to check me on it, but I know it's the higher the higher the total price gets to, the larger slice that Southampton will receive. So that's why they want, more upwards of 30 million, because then they'll get more than they paid was it bang on 4 million for it 2 years ago. But this is, this is why transfers get confusing, and probably why UEFA have, or whoever it was recently, stuck in that new amortization deal as well, because you have these players move so much now that you're thinking, oh, hold on, we put in a 2-year clause for him last time, and now he's signed a new contract. Now he's going here, so it's a lot to deal with at the moment. And again, maybe one of the reasons why negotiations take so long with these kind of players, because they've got so many little parts in their contract that need to be changed.
It's going to be fascinating to see, because, like I say, the madness has kind of only just begun, really. Because obviously we're talking on the 2nd of July, and you feel like already a lot of deals have been done, but we're kind of only a drop in the ocean in terms of what actually will be done in the next 2 months. And you've mentioned Kyle Walker-Peters. Sam's never been a fan, and he's been quite open about that. I do think there is some talent in the player. I really do. My theory is, and my argument would be, is he better than what Newcastle have got at this moment in time, and does he improve Newcastle United right now? And that's where I think there's a question mark there. And my other question to you, Mark, in regards to Kyle Walker-Peters, I'm kind of leaving Livramento out because of the injury and his potential more than anything. But why did Southampton overall get relegated? Because most teams, rightly or wrongly, or who aren't in a relegation battle, will look and go, well, the defence must be awful, they don't score a lot of goals. I know that must make sense. So if Kyle Walker-Peters is a mainstay of that defence, why should a top 4 team, essentially, of Newcastle right now, be looking at him?
Yeah, no, it's a good question as well. I mean, you look at why have Spurs spent the money on Maddison as well, because he's a luxury player and gets cherry picked out of that team. But I've asked that a million times to myself. Why does Southampton go down this year? I mean, if you want like an overall, look at it, I think that from the top to bottom, things just weren't working. Things have gotten kind of stale under Ralph Hasenhüttl, which me and Sam spoke about last time as well. The kind of atmosphere that was going around was pretty negative. I think the transfer dealings were poor. They lost a lot of experience. And I know you look back at it and you look at the players that left, and your Nathan Redmonds, Fraser Forsters and stuff, not star players, but players that had a lot of experience in that dressing room that left. The big one being Oriol Romeu as well. When he went, there was kind of even more. He was allowed to leave because of the club were happy for him to go with a year left on his contract and didn't want to stand in his way. But that turned out to be pretty fatal in the end as well. 3 managers, a complete kind of sometimes a complete failure to turn up when their backs were against the wall. I haven't actually looked at the record, but it was incredible how many times Southampton would play dreadfully against teams around them. And then somehow, you guys probably saw it. I was living it at the time, but you see it when every now and again they'd get a 3-3 draw with Arsenal, 3-3 with Arsenal. Final day, 4-4 with Liverpool. They got a draw at Old Trafford. They beat Chelsea at Stamford Bridge. They beat City in the Carabao Cup. These are results that you think that's a team that's finishing mid-table in the Premier League. But every time when push came to shove, the players just completely down tools. Just to bring it back there with Kyle Walker-Peters, I suppose. But he wasn't a player that you can't massively impact the game all you like from the position that he plays in as well, and so it is difficult for him. But I know what you mean. Maybe you look at that defence and go, I don't want to stick anywhere near anyone that kind of featured in that back 4 or back 5 that it was at times. But I think with Carl, you look at him as someone who is incredible, adaptable to the situation he's in. And this year, he again in a relegation season, you don't really talk about leaders, but he was one of the younger players that once all the leaders were out of that dressing room, I feel like he tried to at least step up a little bit. So I think away from the pitch as well, there are characteristics in him that I think would suit a club the size of Newcastle.
I think the answer to why they got relegated is that's football. I mean,
that's what you think of my answer as well.
Yeah, that's football. I mean, it sounds pretty similar to the season we got relegated under Steve McLaren, like the team we had, like Wijnaldum, Sissoko, Mitrovic. How can that team go down? But they did pretty comfortably. So yeah, that's football, I think. But they'll be back. They'll come again. Like you say, if they're not in any particular rush to sell, and is the attitude amongst the squad since Hasenhüttl and Nathan Jones, who was he's an interesting chap. Let's have a brief word about Nathan Jones, because what was that like? What dealings did you have with him? What was he like to speak to? And I gathered the dressing room didn't think a lot of him.
Pardon me. Well, it was intense because it was that festive period where after the World Cup break, where kind of games were happening every week, and I felt like I saw Nathan Jones more than my family, and during that period, because it was press conference and game, kind of every 3 or 4 days. So I had a front row seat for everything that happened, and things got away from Nathan Jones before he could control it. But he loved to talk, and he loved to talk too much at times, and the press officer and the media team had kind of warned him a few times about it, but once things got on him, he had to talk about it. And the famous meltdown at Brentford, which is what he kind of lost him his job in the end, really, or put him on the very last step of the rung, or the plank rather. I think that's the one that gets remembered. But the one for me is, I mentioned that City game before, when it was probably the crowning moment for Nathan Jones that week. He beat Everton at Goodison. He beat City at St Mary's in the Cup, and they also won in the FA Cup at Selhurst Park. So that should have been the crowning week for him, and the turning point, if you will. But I remember after that Man City game, and he came into the press conference room after, and he focused more on what the Havant and Waterlooville manager had been saying about him in the build-up. So he spoke for ages about a non-league manager that had been digging him out on the radio, saying he wasn't good enough to be a Premier League manager. And you just thought, you've just beaten Pep Guardiola, man. Just like, if you're going to give yourself any credit, I know now's the time, but I don't know why you're dragging him into it. But yeah, he was nuts, really. It was a crazy moment. And by the end of it, everyone wanted him out. I think in different circumstances, I think Nathan Jones would have been a fantastic manager at Southampton. They've gone for Russell Martin now, who, although they're different stylistically, they've got many of the same hallmarks that the club were looking for in a new manager, in that EFL experience, the youngness and the passion that you get out of the players. And a lot of the players, it wasn't as if they all hated him either. He did manage to get stuff out of them. And there were a few that in the dressing room that, I think a lot of people just felt it was just the wrong appointment, unfortunately. And hopefully the club learnt their lesson from it. And, a manager that had never even touched the Premier League before, being parachuted in midway through a season to try and fix a squad that, I think even the best managers would struggle to work with that squad, to be honest. So it was doomed from the start. And then Ruben Sellers comes in at the end, and well, he's now in League One with Reading, so that tells you all about the calibre of manager
Well, Nathan Jones was nice about us after the Cup semi-final, so yeah.
Yeah, he's a very respectful guy as well. Like, born again Christian, was really friendly in all the press conferences. Didn't deserve a lot of the abuse he got at Southampton as well, because he did get a lot of it. But I think a lot of that was frustration with the team in general. So these things happen in football, like you said earlier.
It certainly does. Nathan Jones stopped the quadruple. That's all you need to know.
Yeah.
He stopped the quadruple. The rest is history. Let's talk about a man who's probably Mr. Southampton, James Ward-Prowse. The former Mr. Southampton was probably Matt Le Tissier. And I still think a lot of Newcastle fans get a cold sweat when they hear that name, in terms of the amount of good goals he scored against Newcastle in the 90s. And James Ward-Prowse he has scored against Newcastle as well. So he's continued that trait. Let's talk about James Ward-Prowse. Again, he is the golden boy, the star man of Southampton. Could he be the star man of Newcastle United? Because midfielders, I know Sandro Tonali is a player that Newcastle haven't officially announced yet, but it's 99.99999% done. We're just waiting for a tweet or some sort of confirmation. But I still think Newcastle would like to do a little bit more business in midfield, and James Ward-Prowse's name keeps on getting mentioned. I don't know whether it's the concrete interest, but it has always been reported that Newcastle do admire the player from a distance. I think the two questions I have to ask about James Ward-Prowse is, number one, will he kick up a fuss to try and get a Premier League move? Has he got it in him to do that? Or do you think that maybe his ties with Southampton are that strong that he won't do that? And secondly, what fee are we talking about? Because as you mentioned, Mark, quite rightly, money talks.
Will he kick up a fuss? I'd like to think no, he wouldn't. I think there has been a kind of gentleman's agreement there that Southampton will listen to offers for him. A source kind of told me towards the end of the season that it was 99, like you say with your signings as well. It was 99.9% that James would go this summer. Whether any of that's changed in the last few weeks, I doubt it. Whether he'd be a star player at Newcastle, I don't think he would be. Personally, anyway, I think there's other stars in that Newcastle team, and I think James Ward-Prowse divides opinion quite a lot in what he offers teams. Some people say he's just a dead ball specialist, and that's all he is. But watching him in the last however many years I have, he is so much more than that, and I think he has a lot to bring to teams. And it's no wonder that the kind of teams that have been talking about him, I think the fact that Brighton and Brentford were talked about early on just shows that the respect that a lot of teams have for him, especially his tactical understanding of the game, what he allows others to do so brilliantly as well. So I don't think he's the kind of player that you need to worry about on that sense. And I don't think he'd kick up a fuss either, because I can't see Southampton, going crazy with their valuation, which leads me in to the fact that they kind of want around 40 to 50 million for him, which, as the kind of club captain, the leader, the legend that he is. And it's a lot of money. And I don't think many clubs really value him at that at all, really. I think West Ham, with the money that they'll get for Declan Rice, maybe that's an option there as well. But I think if they managed to get 40 to 50 million for him, I think it would be a real, I think they'd have absolutely had someone if they managed to pull that off, to be honest. And there is no sentimentality when it comes to figures on a checkbook. You know what I mean? So it doesn't matter if he does want to kind of move to the Premier League. I think Southampton, I don't think they'll dig their heels in, but again, they're not going to go ahead and accept anything that they don't see fitting their estimation either. That 40 to 50 million is what we've seen a couple of times now reported. And that was the same at the start, maybe about 4 or 5 weeks ago. And it's kind of the same now as well. So whether things change in the next few weeks, I don't know. But there's still yet to be, as far as I'm aware, anything concrete has come in for him. He was back on the first day of pre-season and wiped the floor with everyone on the bleep test. So that just goes to show you what kind of guy he is, really.
Yeah, I like Ward-Prowse. I couldn't agree more. What you say, Mark, he is so much more than a dead ball specialist. We had Warren Barton on the show a few months back, and he was the one that picked out, James Ward-Prowse to be someone that we should definitely be in for. As much of a fan of him as I am, I think he'd probably struggle to get into our first team next season with the signing of Tonali, to go in there with Bruno and Joe Linton, who's just now an utter beast compared to just a lummox isolated up front. The turnaround in that guy is out of this world, but I just can't see anyone paying 40 to 50 million for him. I think 30 million sounds about right to me, but like you say, you mentioned West Ham. I would say that is such a typical West Ham signing, James Ward-Prowse.
Yeah, I can see why the links are there as well, because I see what he offers Southampton in abundance, which is just that kind of that protection. And I was going to say that calmness, but last season was anything but calm for Southampton. So maybe that was just he does need those players around him. But I think you're bang on there. I think I would kind of quiver a little bit if I was being quoted anything above 40 for him. I think Southampton can get between 30 and 40. I can see that being a transfer fee they command for him. But no, you're right. I think maybe they would need to come down a little bit. But I said this at the top of when I first came on. So much of Southampton's business this summer is going to be reactionary. It's going to be seeing how much they get here, how much they get there. And while no one is really at the table and putting money down, there's not really much they can do but kind of keep on keeping on. They don't want to leave it too late, but they left it very late last year. They signed 4 players on deadline day in the summer and another 2 on deadline day in the winter as well. So, they're more than happy to kind of see these things go on if they want to.
I think the only thing I would say with James Ward-Prowse, obviously the Euros is next year. He's been so close to getting into the squad in the World Cup, so close to getting into the squad for the European Championships, and it's just fell short on a couple of occasions. That may be another, I think,
There's places up for grabbing that in that England midfield in the squad, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. I remember before Qatar, I think we all said most of us in the media kind of group kind of said if he doesn't get into this one, we can't see him going to. That's always been his dream, right? It's to be at a major tournament with England, and this Euros is surely the last opportunity for him to do that. I know the midfield isn't kind of strong, but it seems like Gareth Southgate likes Conor Gallagher in there, doesn't he? He doesn't really, I know I probably make the same face as you, Danny, but he seems to have his favourites, doesn't he? And if Trent kind of impresses in there, the place is kind of run away from Prowsey, unfortunately, even though he's a hard worker. And I would love to have him been on that free kick at the end of the France game as well, and out in Qatar. But I think maybe that will play on his mind a little bit, and he'll think, I need to go somewhere where I'm not just in the Premier League, but I'm playing every single week without fail. Because if he's not, then there's absolutely no chance that he kind of goes to the Euros, is there?
Yeah, no, it reminds me of the Andros Townsend situation when we got relegated again. I think there's a lot of similarities between Newcastle and Southampton's relegations. So we're not signing James Ward-Prowse. Another one in that midfield is a player I know you think a lot of, because I remember you mentioning him last time we spoke, Mr. Lavia. How good can this kid be?
Yeah, he's. I'm so invested in where he ends up. There's no chance Southampton keep hold of him this summer. It's such is the kind of quality he's got. But he's one of those players that, even with the team that you support and you see him kind of gloss over your club. It's one season, maybe you get two out of them, but you will hold on to that for years and years to come. And wherever they go, you go. Do you remember that 1 year he spent that kind of thing? He's a really joyful footballer. He's a lovely guy. For pre-season last year, I was in Austria, and it was his first ever kind of external interview I did with him. And I think he just turned 19 or 18, whatever he was. And he's the nicest chap. And I wish the best for him, because I think he's fantastic. And at that age in midfield to come in the Premier League, and it's not incredibly eye-catching. It's not 7 and 8 goals and assists from midfield and that kind of thing. But it's the tiny things he does that you realise, he just did that against an incredible Man City team, or he'll flick the ball over. Those kind of moments, the ones that really stand out for you when you're sat in the stadium. I think he can go really, really high, and he's got incredible work ethic, great people around him, so it seems as well. But again, he's someone that just needs game time, so he needs to go somewhere where he's not only going to be appreciated, but he's actually going to be given the chance to kind of flourish. Because I think one of the most exciting things about Romeo Lavia is you don't really know what kind of player he is right now. He's kind of explosive. He can get away from players. He can do box to box. He's incredible defensively, but there's so many kind of little assets to his game to improve on that you kind of want to see him go somewhere where the manager is really going to work with him and build him into a player of incredible caliber.
I think the 2 points I would make on Lavia is that I was so impressed at St James's Park towards the back end of the season. Sam was at the game as well, and if you can remember, Sam, in that 3-1 win for Newcastle, Southampton's goal basically comes from Lavia challenging Bruno Guimaraes in the centre of the park, and Southampton get the counter, and obviously Stuart Armstrong scores to make it 1-0. The one thing I think Lavia probably needs is a good coach to really get even more out of him. And I think Eddie Howe is probably the perfect man for that job in terms of actually getting the most out of a Romeo Lavia. You've seen it with so many players of Newcastle over the last 18 months, like Joe Linton was mentioned by Sam quite rightly. I think that was certainly something that I think a lot of Newcastle fans would like, because I don't know Sandro Tonali as much as Sam does in terms of what he will bring. And Sam has been a big fan of Tonali for a little while and would love him at Newcastle, and that's going to happen. But what will Lavia bring if he was to come to Newcastle? What's his best attributes?
I think purely as that person that breaks up play and stops attacks. I mean, we said it earlier about how the team that finishes bottom of the Premier League, you expect them to look at that goals against table and it kind of be a graveyard of horrible 7-0s and that kind of thing. And Southampton have had plenty of their 9-0s in the past, that kind of stuff. But he was one of the main reasons why Southampton didn't get embarrassed on a regular basis. I think there was only one immediate moment that springs to mind where he was really at fault for anything, and it was on the final day of the season against Liverpool, and that was just a crazy game. He kind of passed it away in his own box and gave away a goal. But I think where he does kind of flourish, if anything, is receiving the ball with his kind of back to play, turning, being aware of what's going on around him, and just being that kind of monster that he is. I think someone called him Dr. Octopus a couple of times throughout the season. He's got these legs that seem to just protrude out of nowhere and kind of hook the ball back away from you on counter attacks, and the energy of him is fantastic. Maybe slightly injury prone is a worry. I think that comes from being young in your first full season of the men's game. He kind of got a little bit leggy towards the kind of World Cup break and potentially cost him a place in the squad that went to Qatar there. I know he's kind of back in there, and it looks like he's going to be progressing massively into the Belgian first team. But I think that is one thing that I'd look at him and manage his workload. But, like you guys said, the ceiling is really high for this kid.
Yeah, this is the one for me. This is the jewel in the crown for Southampton, and like you say, Mark, it's going to be so difficult to keep hold of him. Obviously, the obvious questions: interest and costs. So Liverpool were marked down as interested, but they've signed McAllister and now Szoboszlai. So are they still sniffing around? We were kind of vaguely linked with him pretty early on in June. So I don't know if there's anything concrete there. And of course, the fee, then I'm expecting around 40 to 50 million, where he'd actually be worth it over Ward-Prowse.
Yeah, no, he definitely would be worth it. Having watched him, I'd put him even higher than that, to be honest. Next year, City get their buyback potential come into him. So there's no doubt that this summer is the one that they need to, if Southampton are going to get a big profit on him or even going to get the full whack, then it has to be it. So I very much doubt that there is any chance he stays around. I think Chelsea have had a really long pursuit of him. Pretty much it was in that kind of first Todd Bowley summer last year where all the player had to do was pass the ball once, and they were linked with moving to Stamford Bridge, weren't they? But he was one. I think we were at where were we? I think we were in Aston Villa away. I think it was Southampton were. We were in the press room afterwards. It was right on deadline day, and we found out that Chelsea had bid for him. What was it, like 3 weeks after the start of the season? It was a verbal offer, and Southampton just binned it off straight away because he'd only been at the club himself for a month and a half. So Chelsea had been really interested for a while. Joe Shields was the Southampton kind of head of recruitment who went to Chelsea, and he's the one that's been pushing to get Lavia to Stamford Bridge. He really recognises the talent there. So I think at the moment they probably look quite well poised if they were going to kind of come in for him. I think there were talk about Arsenal as well, but I'm not too sure about that one at the moment, considering what's going on with Declan Rice and all the money they're spending there. So it's take your pick of the top clubs, really, isn't it? Which for most Southampton fans right now, I'm sure they'd rather not even think about it. They know he's going somewhere, but the fact he's going anywhere is bad enough, to be honest with you. But I've not heard anything about Newcastle in the last few weeks. Right now, I'd say it probably looks like Chelsea and maybe Liverpool are kind of coming back in. But this is the transfer window, isn't it?
Oh, Johnny, your audio has just completely gone. Yes, I gathered. Good job we're editing this afterward. So, with Lavia though, do you think that maybe Chelsea? I can't see as that being a good fit for a young player when you've got 20 other midfielders in there, all costing £1 billion each, all on £500,000 a minute. It's one of them where if he had a sensible head on his shoulders, would Chelsea really be a viable option for Lavia?
It seems scattergun as well at Chelsea, doesn't it? Where you don't really know with Pochettino. I mean, we know the calibre that he's got, but we don't know how he's going to kind of work at Stamford Bridge, how that squad is going to react to him. Everyone thought that Frank Lampard was going to go in there and kind of iron over a few things. Well, actually, maybe they didn't after seeing him at Everton this year. But, still, you can't really predict what's going to happen there. So I suppose we'll see with Lavia. If he does go to Chelsea, you're right. It'll be really interesting because his future will then be tied into that club in terms of, I can imagine it would be a massive contract as they keep signing players down to as well. So, it's one that is really interesting. I just hope that wherever he goes, the manager, like you said with Eddie, potentially with Poch as well could maybe mould him and make sure that he fulfills that potential.
It'll certainly be interesting, really, really interesting to see what happens in terms of Lavia and where he does end up. And if he does end up in a Newcastle shirt, I think a lot of Newcastle fans will be certainly delighted with that. But Sam, I want you to finish things off because there's a player that hasn't been linked at all with Newcastle United, but you really want to ask Mark about a particularly young forward that has caught your eye.
Yes. I mean, look, Tonali wasn't linked with us when I first mentioned him 3 years ago. So, hey-ho, why not give it a shot? Carlos Alcaraz interests me.
Go away.
No?
Leave him alone. Leave him alone.
Really? That means I'm right, and he's quite good, isn't he?
Yeah. Charlie is an absolute gem, and I'm surprised people haven't been sniffing around him even more.
So am I.
He's come over from Argentina, and not many players come over from South America to the Premier League and hit it straight away. But this kid has got so much energy. He's so raw. He's clearly not, he's not one of these pristine kids that's come out of a, Cat 1 academy or anything like that. He's got a lot to learn, but he's got bundles of enthusiasm. I think technically he's got a real good eye for attacking football as well. He is a midfielder, but he's so much of a number 10 in that classic kind of central area. Doesn't really have to shift around to the left and the right. Just likes playing the ball going through him. He's happy to kind of get it wherever. He's strong in the tackle as well. Hands off him. I think Brighton were interested as well, but fingers crossed Southampton keep him because I think a year in the Championship, I think he's got the potential to really kind of tie it all together, basically.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. How much did you sign him for? Remind me, because I imagine his stock has risen a little bit, even though he's not, prominent in the headlines.
Yeah, I think it was about 12 to 13 million, if I'm right. And I can't remember if there were any add-ons. It might have been a little bit less in that regard then. But yeah, I don't know how much of a profit they would make on him right now. But I tell you what, if they gave it a year or so, I think they can make masses on him. I really like him as a player.
I can't wait to see him play for Newcastle next season. Can you, Sam?
Yeah, we've jinxed it now. We've done it.
Yeah, no, I'm on a ridiculous hot streak in predicting transfers. It's scary. But yeah, you heard it here first. Carlos Alcaraz, not the tennis player.
No, just a brief summary, Mark. Last year when Newcastle were linked with Alexander Isak, Sam wanted him for a long, long time. And fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you see it, I had to break the news to Sam that Alexander Isak had just agreed a deal to come to Newcastle. Honestly,
I told you to F off.
You did. You just couldn't believe me when I told you. But anyway, Sandro Tonali's next. Will Carlos Alcaraz be third time lucky in terms of Sam Milner getting transfers that weren't even mentioned? That could be right. Let's just see what happens, of course, from your side of things, Mark. We hope that's not the case from a Southampton point of view, of course. But just to wrap things up, we've gone through a couple of names. I'm not going to mention Alcaraz because obviously nothing's really been mentioned, but I just want a probability out of 10. What are the chances for Newcastle for each of the players? So we'll start with Tino Livramento. Out of 10, what do you think in terms of him being a Newcastle player next season?
Today, on Sunday evening, I'll give it a 4 out of 10.
Ooh, I was expecting higher.
Yeah, so was I. Kyle Walker-Peters.
Maybe I did go too low with Tino because I want to bump Tino to a 5, put Carl as a 4.
James Ward-Prowse?
Not happening.
1 out of 10. Yeah.
1 out of 10.
That gives me an inch. It can't say 0, doesn't it?
And finally, Romeo Lavia.
I should say 0 out of 10. We'll say 1 out of 10 for him as well. Same as Prowse, not happening.
Wow. So Livramento's the most likely, but unlikely at this moment.
5 out of 10. Well, this has been a catastrophic waste of time. Cheers, Mark.
Dip into if Dean Ashworth wants to dip into his pockets a bit more, I'm sure Southampton fans will send off Tino to you.
Oh well.
Yeah, good player.
Let's see what Mr. Ashworth can do. He's done okay since he's come through the door. He's managed to sell Chris Wood for 15 million quid, so there's been some good dealings from Dan Ashworth over the last 18 months altogether, shall we say. But Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the Green and Muller show. Really, really enjoyed it. It's great to get a real good view and a real good insight into a few players that Newcastle have been linked with. If any of them do come to Newcastle, I'm sure a lot of people will look back at this interview and go, this is what we should expect, if any of them happen at all. But let's just see what happens. But look, best of luck next year. Obviously, I know you've got the gig with Brighton as well. A couple of European trips. I'm sure you'll be allowed 1 or 2 beers in some Latvian group stage game for Brighton in particular.
Fingers crossed.
One word answer, Mark. Final one from me. Sorry. One word answer. Where's Caicedo going to be playing next season?
God. Chelsea.
With Lavia. Wow. Caicedo's so overrated. But anyway, Johnny, wrap up.
I don't agree with that, by the way. I do not agree with that. But I'll let the listeners decide on what they think of Moises Caicedo, and I'm sure Mark has his own personal views on that. And if you do want to read Mark's views on that, of course, he is the correspondent for Hampshire Live and Southampton, Brighton from next season. If you want to read on that, please by all means give that a good look into, because there's some fantastic stuff on there. But Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, as I've mentioned. Hopefully it's not too busy in terms of Southampton or Brighton. Hopefully you get a bit of time to relax before the season starts, but we wish you all the best for the following season.
Thanks, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Sam, the transfer window just keeps on getting crazier and crazier, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And of course, stay tuned to Newcastle Fans TV. And for the audio podcast, the links are all in the description. If you're listening on Apple, please hit that 5-star review.
Fantastic. So for myself, Jonathan Greer, and my co-host Sam Muller, and today's guest, Mark Wyatt, we'll see you all very soon.